when you're talking about things that are so life-altering and impact fertility, impact function, impact your health, cholesterol, bone density, a child can't consent to becoming a lifelong patient. A child can't consent to things like what I'm gonna have to go through, which is getting surgery every single year, every single 10 years. That's something I had no idea about. I had no conception of if I even wanted children. I was a child, I couldn't think about that prospect. So I just think that's a decision that generally adults could only have the capacity to make.
Before we continue, please help the algorithm boost our reporting that asks the questions others won't by liking this video, clicking subscribe, and turning on all notifications. Thanks for supporting the Daily Signal. Now back to the video.
When did you first start identifying as transgender?
I was about 12 years old. I had sort of discussed the possibility of me being transgender with one of my guidance counselors, and then we sort of came to that conclusion together. But she sort of told my parents and my school without really me fully identifying as that just yet. So it wasn't really on my own terms, but I was around 12.
What do you think contributed to you and this guidance counselor reaching that decision?
Well, pretty bluntly, I was sexually assaulted when I was really young, so I had a lot of negative feelings about being a girl and being female. And when I first expressed those feelings and looked for answers about that online, the first thing that came up was gender dysphoria and possible gender incongruence. So I sort of started looking into that and talking about my feelings about my body with my guidance counselor, and we sort of came to that conclusion together.
And what was it like after your guidance counselor and you reached this decision? What did the guidance counselor do next?
Basically, immediately after that meeting with her, we had sort of talked for an hour and a half about it. She didn't tell me she was going to tell my parents, but basically immediately after, she called them and told them that I was transgender. So the first thing when I got home after that was my parents confronting me with so you want to be a boy? How long have you been feeling this way? And it was very overwhelming. But basically immediately after, I just had to discuss it with my parents.
I'm sure. And then how did you find Dr. Johanna Olson-Kennedy?
Yeah, so my parents found her because they were looking for experts on trans youth in the area, and they sort of took me to her with the impression that she would probably diagnose me out of this because I had no signs of gender dysphoria as a child. So they weren't really sure what she would think of me, but on that first meeting, she was pretty confident that I was trans.
Wow. And what was your experience like with her?
At first, it was a lot of surface level questions about how I fit in and how I felt with my peers and how I felt about being a girl and what I wanted my future to look like. And I had so many negative feelings about being a girl. So I felt weirdly very validated when she told me that there was a very clear diagnosis of something physically wrong with my body and that it wasn't me that was the problem, it was my body.
What do you wish that she would have said to you looking back?
In retrospect, I just wish somebody had told me that puberty is uncomfortable for everyone, but especially for young girls, and especially for young girls that have been sexually abused in their childhoods. And if she had just asked me if I had gone through sexual abuse or if I had weird experiences in my childhood that may change my opinions about gender, I think I might have come to a different conclusion. So I really wish she sort of interrogated my ideas about womanhood.
And what was the process like of starting on hormones?
It was pretty fast. I started on puberty blockers when I was 12, about a couple of months after we first met her. She had to convince my parents a little bit to agree to it by telling them that it was reversible. And then about a year after that, when I was 13, sort of around when I was about to turn 14, I started on testosterone. And after the puberty blockers for about a year, she was sort of insisting the importance of starting testosterone to my parents. And I was also feeling the importance because my peers were sort of developing and I was stagnant. And I was also getting a lot of sort of the side effects when you go on puberty blockers, like hot flashes and things like that. And those typically go away when you go on cross-sex hormones.
And what else was it like to go through those side effects at such a young age, especially since you said that you weren't aware that was what was going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I was really looking forward to being on puberty blockers because I was so afraid of female development. And what it did is it really changed the appearance of my breast tissue, actually. I didn't have a lot, but when I went on puberty blockers, it sort of, for lack of a better word, deflated the tissue that was already there. So it made me feel a lot worse about my chest than I originally did. And I also experienced things like hot flashes or just feeling kind of dizzy a lot. And that kind of incentivized me to go on testosterone.
And then after that, you got a surgery, right?
Yeah, I got my double mastectomy at about 14. It was in May when I was 14.
Mm-hmm. And what was that like?
Honestly, at first, I was really, really excited about it because I had so much hatred about my body from the sexual assault. And I had no nervous feelings about it. And I was just like, get them off of me. I had no idea what breast tissue even actually looked like, but I was very excited to have that problem just solved. But then after I got the surgery, it really kind of sunk in and sort of hit me what happened when I actually woke up and felt how physically painful it was. And I didn't really start feeling nervous about it until after.
When did you first start feeling some regret?
I wouldn't say it was necessarily regret, but I sort of had a lot of negative feelings about what happened a few months after top surgery. And I started becoming really anxious and depressed, and my mental health got pretty significantly worse. And then my anxiety eventually sort of developed into a psychotic break.
And you said that Dr. Olson-Kennedy said that you were suicidal in order to get you on puberty blockers, but that wasn't true. Why do you think that happened?
Yeah, she proposed that when it was time for me to go on testosterone and proposed the idea of, would you rather have a dead daughter or a living son, to my parents. And I was not suicidal at the time, so I think she was sort of presenting that and the really grave statistics that are actually somewhat inaccurate to my parents to incentivize them to keep going with the treatment. But actually, after being on testosterone, I was much more I was never actively suicidal before testosterone, but I was actively suicidal post testosterone, and I was much more symptomatic of things like depression or things that they were saying to my parents that they were treating with the cross-sex hormones actually manifested after.
Wow. So you would say that it actually made your mental health worse.
Yeah, by a lot, pretty significantly.
Along those lines, Dr. Olson-Kennedy is known to have hidden the results of a $10 million study showing that puberty blockers don't actually help kids' mental health. What do you think about that study, given your experience?
Yeah, it's really disheartening to hear because part of why my parents trusted her so much is because she is so trusted by not just like government figures, but in the medical community, her approach was sort of seen as groundbreaking and a guideline standard. So it is really disheartening to hear that her intentions, or I don't know about intentions, but at least her honesty about her practice is not where my parents thought it was. And that's the whole reason they trusted her in the first place.
Do you and your family feel tricked and lied to in that way?
Yeah, definitely. And I think telling me that the only treatment for my body issues was transitioning was kind of the worst thing for me, because in retrospect, I just have PTSD. I just needed treatment for what happened to me when I was a kid.
When did you decide to go back to living as a girl?
Earlier this year, actually. It wasn't until I had actually gone through therapy that I started thinking, why am I really doing this? And I started actually picturing my future. And when I got to college, and I was in an all-male dorm, actually, and I just started looking around me, and I didn't feel like I was living as myself. I was living as somebody I created to run away from myself.
And what inspired you to bring legal action against Dr. Olson-Kennedy?
Yeah, I didn't really want to go public at first. I just sort of wanted to heal on my own terms, but I started thinking back on my experience and realizing how egregious her standard of care was towards me. And when I started actually talking to other detransitioners and reading stories online about other people who have been through the same thing I've been through, and then seeing some of the comments she's made online about her practice and about how you can just go get breasts later, I really felt like I sort of needed to say something.
And what responses have you gotten since going public with your story?
Yeah, I've gotten a lot of support. I've also gotten some negative messages from people, which is the minority, thankfully, but it is kind of strange to hear people just come after me for saying what happened to me. It's not anything really, in my opinion, that political. It's just my life. But the amount of support that I've received has been really nice, actually. And hearing from people who have kids in similar situations or who have been through similar situations has actually been really nice.
What has life been like since you detransitioned?
At first, it was pretty rough. I did lose a lot of friends, and I was in a very queer and trans sort of bubble. So losing a lot of that was really scary at first. But overall, it's been really nice, and I've sort of reconnected with a side of me that I thought was just totally gone. And I've made a lot of new friends and new connections with people. And I've actually had a lot easier of a time being social and being myself.
And like you said, Olson-Kennedy told you that these procedures, even the surgery, are reversible. You've seen that that hasn't been true. What has that been like?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is that I'm going into reconstructive surgery pretty soon. And what really, really upset me is that I will never be able to breastfeed and I will have to get surgery every 10 years to replace the implants. And it won't look as natural as it should have been. I will never know what my body should have looked like. And that is like the number one thing that has shocked me is that they told me it was reversible and you can just go get them later. You can't get back that tissue. That's impossible.
Mhm. And what is your advice to other kids who are experiencing gender dysphoria and are considering transitioning?
I don't want to disillude anyone from doing anything, but I think it is important to tell kids that there's nothing wrong with them physically. They're perfect the way they are. And if they feel ashamed of who they are and ashamed of their body, that's not their fault. It's other people's fault for making them feel that way. And learning to love yourself is the best thing you can do for yourself.
Supreme Court is currently considering a case about if states can ban transgender procedures for minors. Do you wish that your state had laws to protect you from undergoing medical interventions?
Yeah, in my opinion, absolutely. I don't want to say that these types of medical procedures are wrong for everybody, but when you're talking about things that are so life altering and impact fertility, impact function, impact your health, cholesterol, bone density, a child can't consent to becoming a lifelong patient. A child can't consent to things like what I'm going to have to go through, which is getting surgery every single year, every single 10 years. That's something I had no idea about. I had no conception of if I even wanted children. I was a child. I couldn't think about that prospect. So I just think that's a decision that generally adults could only have the capacity to make.
Totally. What do you hope your life will look like in the future?
Yeah, I really hope in the future I can just move forward from this and live a happy life as a woman. I really hope to be a mother one day. Hopefully that's possible. I have no idea, but I hope I can just move forward from this and spend the rest of my life as who I was supposed to be.
And how would it feel to get justice for what you'd experienced through this lawsuit?
It would feel great to know that not just I would be getting justice, but that in the future children would be treated better, because I think every child is entitled to proper diagnoses, proper mental health care, and I really hope that this can change something about the standard of care.
And what would your advice be to other young people who are identifying as transgender, are thinking, maybe this isn't for me, but they're scared about losing friends, losing support, or about just backlash with that decision?
Yeah, I think anybody who is questioning their identity needs to just think about what they want for their future. What do you really want? And why do you feel the need to change your body or go along with things that other people are telling you you need to do? What do you actually want? Which is something I didn't really consider until I was 18.
Mm-hmm. And do you have advice for parents as well whose kids are struggling with this?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to put myself in that place because when I think about what my own parents were told about the suicide rate, I I would also be terrified of my child committing suicide, but I would also tell parents to look for second opinions, listen to what your child is saying. Don't just listen to the doctors, don't just listen to the first person you talk to, and don't listen to social media, especially because social media is very, very specific with rhetoric that is exclusively political. And I think focusing on what your child is saying to you and where is that coming from is really important.
Kind of going off of that, do you feel like social media had a really big impact in influencing your choices?
Yeah, I think so. I think that when I saw these people on social media who were living such better lives transitioned, I thought, well, if they can do it, so can I. But in retrospect, a lot of adults that transition are doing it for totally different reasons. And it's not purely out of something like I went through where I was suffering from PTSD about sexual assault. And that wasn't really something that's addressed on social media, is that gender dysphoria can be coming from other things. So it definitely played a role in my decision making.
Thank you so much.